Hi guys, welcome to my channel. Today we are going to discuss about Rimuru's Elegant Escape. This video contains spoilers, so with due let's get continue. Side chapter, Rimuru's Elegant Escape Play, 09. Diablo and Sui were led to the president's office. Diablo was deep in thought and did not even glance at the person who had guided them and bowed politely before leaving. He understood Sui's argument. And he knew that it was right. What Sui thought was that if the academy was decaying, the reason must be that someone was doing it deliberately. If that was the case, he was right to stop Diablo, who was just going to purge it. Unlike his master, who wanted to save everyone, Diablo felt that it was his role to convict people. However, if there was a possibility of self-purification still left in the academy, then it was his job to watch over it. The political and financial world, research and culture creation, also military defense. They needed to raise personnel who could be active in these fields. And in an ideal environment where people helped each other and did not allow corruption and infighting. That was the ideal the Rimuru had established. As for the realization of this ideal society, Rimuru himself had said that it was impossible. But he had also said that the process of pursuing this ideal, and the effort put into eradicating the foundation for corruption, was his true aim. Veldanava tried to lead people through having a demon lord become the enemy of humankind. Emperor Rudra tried to make humankind unite and stop fighting by having the angels strictly monitor civilization. As for the great demon lord Rimuru, who Diablo loved and respected, he wanted to decrease the corruption itself through changing the very nature of humans and increasing their ability to self-purify. And so attempting to corrupt the academy was to go against Rimuru's aim completely. It was the actions of an enemy. It was a challenge against Diablo. I thought that it was just that the self-purification wasn't working, but there's a possibility that that isn't the case. Indeed, if that's the case, I was imprudent to try and deal with it so simply. Still, it's hard to think that there is anyone so foolish to try and bother Lord Rimuru's plans. Diablo switched his way of thinking. He had intended to deal with the incompetent people in Rimuru's place, but that was a mistake. If there were people who were so foolish as to try and upset Rimuru's policy for the academy, and they were successful, then it was him who was the incompetent one. He would crush these enemies. With a clear will, Diablo listened to what the president had to say. As Diablo and Sui sat on a sofa in front of him, the president began to explain the situation. This president was one of the early goblin members who had evolved after being named by Rimuru, so there was never any fear of betrayal. However, he was aware that he was being tested as well, and so he poured with sweat as he desperately spoke. He seemed to be acquainted with Sui, but the fact that both Diablo and Sui had visited him, seemed to suggest to him that he had failed in some aspect, which made him very uneasy. There was a report from the collaborator that Sui had prepared. According to it, there was no chaos that could be observed from any awareness of rank or prejudice with the Tempest Development of Human Resources Academy. /div. Sui checked all of these and had them confirmed. Diablo observed these details and determined whether or not there were lies mixed in with the president's words. Sui's questions continued without trouble. However, now, the last question. It seems that some of the teachers have taken an arrogant attitude towards the students. Why is this? Upon hearing this, the president's face looked severely bewildered. Diablo continued to smile as he observed his face carefully. It seemed that Sui had used his own roots to gain various information. He's a very reliable man at these times. It's no wonder that Lord Rimuru assigned such secrecy to him. Diablo was impressed as he watched the scene unfold. Yes, this problem has been bothering me, the president said while looking very troubled. He was apparently going to lay everything out honestly, instead of doubting Sui's words. Diablo and Sui listened to him. This was his explanation. There was a system in place for exchanging students between schools, and the same system also exchanged teachers. However, there were times when the teachers of nobility from the Ingratia Academy would take an oppressive attitude towards the students. And it was these noble teachers who brought these men in white robes with them as guards. Preposterous. The three schools are all equal. I cannot understand why these teachers would treat the students in this way, said Sui. And this was the president's answer. About that, they insist that they are teaching the students about how to behave towards nobles before going out into the world. Additionally, it seems that the NNU Magic and Science Investigation Academy is receiving financial aid, and so they have sided with their stance. And because all three schools are supposed to be equal, their case has gone through. Not only did they have no clear reason for objecting, but the other schools were in agreement. And so he had no choice but to allow them to continue, explained the president. And while he said noble, all of the teachers who worked at the Ingratia Academy would have to add former before it. But there were still kingdoms who kept the noble class, so they were not entirely wrong, either. It was not a bad thing to learn how to deal with people in a polite way. And while it was practically bribery to change one side's opinion with monetary aid, there was no clear proof of it. It was a difficult thing for the president, but as it had not caused any serious trouble yet, he had remained silent. That was the situation. Diablo thought. Until a moment ago, he would have decided that they should all be killed. But not now. If there was an enemy, he should find out what they were thinking so he could rout them out completely. He would not just pull out the stem and leaves and allow the roots to remain. Also, they, in fact, have tremendous abilities as well. The men in white robes are significantly stronger than our school's combat teachers. Perhaps it will be a good stimulant for the students. The president finally added. Diablo continued to think. After hearing this explanation, he was sure of the enemy's existence. The group of people in white robes that he had passed by must be the men that the president was talking about. They did seem quite capable, and he would not be surprised if they were stronger than the instructors of the Tempest Development of Human Resources Academy. Diablo was now happy that he hadn't carelessly approached them. He was thankful to Sui for stopping him. He was letting his guard down recently, since things were so peaceful these days. They must be the enemy. But what was their aim? By making this clear, he would be able to understand the scale of their operations and plan accordingly. Was it to make the students feel inferior? Or perhaps it was to corrupt the students themselves. And if that was the case, what would they gain in return? Diablo's thoughts moved rapidly. He made predictions, checked the results and gains from it, and began to select plans that seemed to add up. There were a few possibilities that he came upon. These led him to one final possibility. President. I have one question, if I may. Yes, of course. What is it? Diablo had suddenly addressed him, and while he seemed very surprised, the president turned to him. He did not expect Diablo to ask him a question in such a polite manner. Oh, you don't need to act so seriously. What I wanted to ask is this, among the teachers who were sent from the Ingratia Academy, did any of them make any requests regarding the dispatching of personnel? Upon hearing this question, the president became silent for a while and thought. But then he looked up and straight into Diablo's eyes and said, I do not remember ever receiving such a request. But his words didn't end there. Indeed, I have never heard of such a request from the teachers that are former nobles. They only introduced us to those men in white robes, the Glory Knights. However, I heard that a number of these Glory Knights were sent to NNU Magic and Science Investigation Academy, so there is a possibility that some kind of request has been made there. Good. That will be most helpful. Diablo thanked him with a gentle smile. This fit with what he had been considering, and he felt that the possibility he had arrived at was practically confirmed. Diablo, did you realize something? I did. Well, the enemy's purpose, anyway. However, I don't even know the size of their forces or who is behind it all. That should be enough. Let's go. The two of them whispered so that the president could not hear, and then they quickly got up from their seats. /div. Well then, we will be leaving now. Please keep this visit a secret between us. Diablo and Sui said. Then they left the room behind them. The president who was left in the room had a vague idea that something was about to happen. But the only thing that he could do was keep silent, just as they had told him. He was the only one here who was confused, and the rest of the academy went about their day as usual. Diablo left the academy and headed to the airport. Sui followed him without saying anything. But then he finally opened his mouth just as the airport came into view. Are you going to tell me, Diablo? Diablo smiled and then nodded. Of course, Sui. But first, we must buy our tickets. Are we going to the Empire? No. We're going to Ingratia. Oh. He kept quiet after that, and the two of them bought their tickets for the airship. And then they used their spare time until departure to visit the luxury restaurant on the highest floor of the airport. They entered a secluded room that was completely soundproof. Even here, the two of them tended to draw attention, but they no longer cared about that, Now, let's hear it. Sui began. Diablo wet his tongue on the expensive fire wine he had ordered, then he opened his red lips. He. But first, let me ask you. Why did you stop me earlier? It's simple. Lord Rimuru has strictly forbidden any acts of violence against persons who have not taken clearly aggressive actions towards us. Setting aside the killing of traitors and punishing those who cause harm, that was the general rule of Tempest. And he had to follow it, even if he was of the elite. This was the same for Sui as well. He did not intend on purging without Rimuru's permission. And so Sui found it necessary to gather evidence first. And you were right, I'm sure. However, I don't want to bother Lord Rimuru over such small matters. Surely you can understand my stance as well. Diablo looked at Sui with narrowed eyes and used Demon Lord's haki. But Sui replied with a cool expression. Are you still going on about that? That is blasphemy, and unforgivable. Diablo listened and then nodded happily. Yes, as if it were the answer that he had wanted to hear. And then he continued as if erasing all of the pressure he had been exuding a second ago. Very good, Sui. Even when I was pressuring you, you stopped me without flinching. I was actually trying to threaten you rather seriously just now. Whether you are serious or just lying, my actions will remain the same. If one of my comrades make a mistake, it is for me to stop them. That's what I wanted to hear. That kind of self-purification among comrades is important. I think that is what Lord Rimuru believes. And when one of us goes astray, it is necessary to draw a clear line. That is what I think. And so Diablo explained his idea to Sui. The reason that the president of the Tempest Development of Human Resources Academy could not act this time was that there was no concrete evidence. Even if the other schools were acting suspiciously, it was up to the views of people to determine whether it was right or wrong. That meant that you could not judge what someone was doing as being evil just by your own intuition. This was why there was a system of deciding by a majority, and you could not go against it. So of course, it did not make sense to just blame the president. The real problem was the lack of a surveillance system. Monetary aid and bribery. They had different names but the result was the same. In that case, it was necessary to find proof of these actions. What was needed was the establishment of a system that you could report to when you thought that something suspicious was happening. Regarding that, that was my mistake. I had my spy search the place, but no detailed reports had come up. I too have become lax due to the peace. Though, your spy may need to be punished. That's my concern. Now, you were talking about drawing a line. What do you mean? Sui's eyes were telling him to get to the main subject. Diablo continued to smile as he did just that. In other words, they attacked that line. What? Let me ask you a question. Do you think that people from other countries can meddle in the politics of our country? To Diablo's question, Sui replied with, impossible. It was true. Tempest's political structure was separated into an upper house and lower house, and bills that were passed by the lower house would still be discarded if the upper house rejected it. The upper house was made up of the elite, and only those that Rimuru chose were allowed to join it. The administration itself had Rigurdo at the top, and the members of the lower house were elected by citizens. But in matters of legislation, the upper house held much more power. And during times of war, all of the institutions would serve under the upper house. As long as this system was in place, even if a foreigner gained citizenship, it would be difficult for them to meddle in the country's politics. Even if they managed to join the lower house, they could not gain the highest level of power in decision-making. Exactly. But what about in matters of business? Or in important institutions such as research? Sui's answer was exactly the same. His answer was that it was impossible. Rimuru was surprisingly stingy when it came to money, and he had acquired all vested interests in advance. There was no chance of getting in afterward. As for the research institutions, heavyweights of the country such as Ramirez and Feldera were involved there, and of course, they left no room for people of other countries to enter. Yes. In other words, if those of other countries wanted to enter these important institutions, they will have to wait for the next generation. If they tried then. I see. That's the connection to the academy. Yes. Diablo nodded. It meant that the enemy was at least smart enough to know that it was a waste of effort to try and force people in now. So they would likely plan in the long term instead of just thinking in the short term. /div. You could say that these were formidable opponents. Corrupt the students and create discrepancies in their abilities. If that happened, brilliant people will naturally flow into Tempest. The students of Tempest would faithfully follow Rimuru's words, and would not act with hostility towards any humans. That's why they were probably holding their heads down now. And like this, the enemy forces would start to control them and gain new authority. This was a long plan that took this all into account. However, because Rimuru had a distrust of the students at the academy, they had succeeded in catching the enemy's plan by the tail. That is Lord Rimuru. He must have seen through everything. Diablo said in an emotional voice. Really? Sui seemed to doubt it, but he knew that voicing it would just make Diablo angry, so he kept quiet. He did feel like there was not any contradiction in Diablo's theory, and he couldn't think of any other purpose. And so he brushed it aside and asked Diablo a different question. So, why Ingratia? Can't we just go to the Empire and find proof of the bribery? Diablo kept smiling as he answered. Indeed, I thought of that too. However, I had one doubt when it came to that. Doubt? Yes. A simple thing, really. These people are no longer nobles, so where did these funds come from? I see. There is a need to investigate that. Yes. Even if we found proof of this bribery, what if it's not real? You cannot bribe someone without money, after all. The Ingratia Kingdom was one of the kingdoms that were left because of Lord Rimuru's kindness. I don't think the money came from the Western countries, but it will be necessary to find out clearly where the money came from. I understand. You are probably correct to think in this way. Sui said and closed his mouth. The only thing left was to find out who was behind it all. Diablo's idea was simple. They were not sure of the size of the enemy forces and the leader. That was all true, but it was clear that it was someone involved with the academy. They should remain calm and slowly apply pressure to this enemy. If they did that, the enemy would reveal itself without a doubt. Diablo came to this conclusion. And now, they would just wait quietly for their departure time. Thank you for watching. Please do like, share and subscribe.